Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this closed webinar for members of Zemo Partnership. I'm Philip Sellwood, I'm the chair, and I'm delighted to be hosting this afternoon's event. The reason we've kept it internal is not because we want to be secretive, but we actually want to really get a good idea of what COP means for the future of the Zemo Partnership, and everybody on this call has a real vested interest in getting to the bottom of what some of the decisions that were made at COP really mean for us. Somebody asked me yesterday on an event whether I thought it was a good or a bad COP, and I'm sure we're going to get some interesting perspectives from a great lineup of board members. But I was just reminded of somebody much more famous in every respect than anybody on this call today. Kissinger said about diplomacy that diplomacy, or successful diplomacy, was the patient accumulation of partial victories, which I thought was a really interesting perspective perhaps to take on COP. It's not what everybody was looking for, but certainly on a number of fronts we've made some significant progress. So what we're going to do today is we're going to have a sort of overview from Bob Moran from the Department for Transport, and he's going to give us a view from both the department's point of view, the UK government's point of view, and knowing Bob also from a bit of personal point of view as well. And then we're going to follow that with a series of sort of 5-minute sessions from 4 board members. We've got Claire Haigh, who's the CEO of Green Transport Solutions. We've got Roger Hunter from Shell, the VP of e-mobile at Shell. Tanya Neech from Scania, the Sustainable Head of Technology, and Greg Marsden, who is the Professor at the Institute of Transport Studies at Leeds. So a really great lineup that we've got. We're going to try and keep it as interrogative as possible. There's an option to ask questions through the chat room, so please feel free, and we'll see if we can pick those up as we go. But we'll also get an opportunity between the panelists to ask questions, not just of Bob, I have to say, but of each other as we go, and hopefully we'll make it as interesting as possible. So that all having been said, hopefully Bob is going to give us a 10-minute sort of review of COP26 with some personal views thrown in, and then we're going to have an opportunity for a bit of Q&A. So hopefully, Bob, over to you.
Thanks ever so much, Philip, and good afternoon, everybody. If anybody needs yesterday's speech explaining, I'm happy to do that as well, in case you didn't understand it. Okay then, right, that proves that I'm going to be offering some personal views. So good cop, bad cop, it's a good question, obviously. I think to answer that directly, pick which one you want, make it fit your narrative, you've already got your side, and then keep working with it. And that's what we all need to do. I think from a tackling climate change perspective, then COP26 has given us progress, as Philip said, definite progress, in fact, and I think we should all applaud that. There is a new deal, nearly 200 countries signed up to it. I think it's 197 in the end that signed up to the Glasgow Climate Pact. 1.5 degrees is still alive, just so they say, but it is still alive, and that is a damn good thing. Outstanding elements of the Paris Agreement have been sorted out finally, once and for all, 6 years on. You know, COP26 was never going to finish the job of, or solve, or finish the job of tackling climate change, or solve it here and now, just over a fortnight in Glasgow, or sort out adaptation for that matter. But it has made definite progress. Now, is it enough? No, it's not. Is it the best we could do? I think I'd have to say yes. You know, collectively, this is a UN thing, not a UK thing. Collectively, it was the best we could do over that fortnight or the year or two run up to it. But we'll keep going. And the UK's got the presidency for a year. This is really difficult stuff. You'll have heard, if you've heard me talk before, you will have heard me say this. This is really difficult stuff. But I do believe that the path ahead is becoming clearer. Now, stick with me on this. It's becoming steeper and it's becoming more precarious. However, there is still a positive way ahead. So please, there's no need for anybody to be too despondent. I do firmly believe that. Don't be too despondent, or certainly no reason for anybody to start giving up just yet. Increasingly, we have clarity around what needs to be done, and there are still choices, as I'm sure Professor Greg will ask me about later on as well. There are still choices that we've got to take. Obviously, deciding not to do or to do certain things today means that you need to make potentially tougher choices, further down the road. In transport, let's be clear straight from the off, walking and cycling was always in the programme. It was in the final declaration. It was always going to be a key feature of the small number of events that were on our stage, and so it was. Fantastic event with Sir Patrick Vallance, Chris Boardman and Dame Sarah Story on the UK stage in the Blue Zone, right where all the politics was, but streaming to the rest of the world. So it was always in the plan. It wasn't a late addition. Glasgow was a small, tight space, and COP26 was being held in the midst of a global pandemic, with delegates from 197 countries, parties. So there were always going to be restrictions, but I feel that we did make the most of the opportunity, and to get that number of people together to deliver what we did, I think we did as hosts make the most of the opportunity. But there's never been any hiding or shying away from the fact that the main campaign for us in transport, and one of the main campaigns for the COP26 presidency, was zero emission vehicles. And we'd had a 2-year campaign, presidency campaign, to get zero emission vehicles to be considered mass market, to hit the tipping point, and to become mainstream. So in the run-up, so many bilateral meetings, 4 meetings of the Zero Emission Vehicle Transition Council, chaired by Alex Sharma and Secretary of State for Transport, Grant Shapps. And in the end, 38 countries, countless fleets, cities, states, regions, and also 6 major manufacturers signed up to that. So I'm going to say thank you, GM, Ford, Mercedes, BYD, and Jaguar Land Rover. Get in there, yeah, for signing up to make all new cars and vans sales zero emission by 2040 globally. That's huge, right? Okay, and by 2035 in leading markets, which is significant as well. Obviously, the UK domestically, we've got different targets, more ambitious targets, but those commitments are huge. Yes, we were disappointed that more weren't able to sign up to that declaration on the way. However, there were bright spots from the ZEV campaign as well. We were really pleased to get trucks in there. It's disappointing that we still have to remind people that electric cars, when you talk about ZEVs, it's not just about electric cars, and electric cars aren't going to save the world. But we got trucks in there. We've got a baker's dozen of countries signed up to making all new trucks zero emission by 2040, which was fantastic, and there's no mean achievement. We've got to start somewhere with trucks. And again, the UK domestically, we are more ambitious, and so the headline announcement, alongside the unveiling of the iconic new charge point design, we confirmed the outcome of our consultation that came out alongside the launch of the Transport Decarb Plan in July on the end of sales dates for new non-zero emission trucks in the UK. In case you missed that, that's 2040 for everything, but 2035 for 26 tonne and under. And I don't say that lightly, because those vehicles are neither light nor small. I know they're massive, they're big trucks. So we will do another detailed technical consultation on the need for any derogations from that. We also had great campaigns through in the run up to COP on maritime and aviation. Look, to wrap up, the focus was the right one. I think we're confident that this is a big global summit. We heard a lot about the importance of finance throughout the fortnight and in the run up to it. And I think for transport, the focus on zero emission vehicles was absolutely justified. And this represents a kind of culmination of 2 years worth of work domestically to make sure that we were on the right footing to go and tell people and challenge them about whether they were doing enough. So you need to look at COP26 alongside the Transport Decarb Plan, the Jet Zero consultation, the Net Zero strategy, the ZEV mandate announcement, the truck phase out dates, and the 5 billion committed over the last 18 months to walking, cycling and buses. Would all of that have been delivered as swiftly, as well, and has been as ambitious as it is without the focus that a home COP gives you? I don't think so. I think COP has focused minds and attention on decarbonisation, particularly in transport, and we've made good use of that time. This is the start of a year in the presidency chair, and we'll use this as a springboard to increase pace. So I think I'll just leave you with the message that I'm trying to get across very hard on the transport decarb plan. The transport decarbonisation plan is absolutely massively ambitious. If we deliver it to its max, then it cuts transport emissions in half this decade and then halves them again over the next 5 years. That's not just a trajectory compliant with net zero 2050, but it gets us there. It will get us there ahead of time. This is a numbers game and every gram counts. But we know we've got to do more. The TDP is the minimum, so we've got to turbocharge it, but I'm confident we can. I'm looking forward to hearing everybody else's thoughts and lots of tough questions.
Okay, thanks very much indeed, Bob. Very direct as always. I may, if I will, just kick off with a couple of thoughts from the chair, through the chair. But please, other panelists, put your hand up if you want to ask a question, because at the moment you're obviously not on camera. You talked, Bob, about finance, or you very briefly touched on finance. One of the things that was really noticeable was that at this COP, finance was absolutely to the fore. The Carney initiative, the commitment in terms of from the developed world to the developing world in terms of the amounts of money that were being pledged. What do you think we now need to do to make sure that some of those pledges are held fast? Because, I mean, you just outlined in 5 or so minutes, you know, literally a sort of whirlwind of policy announcements and pledges, which is absolutely, I don't think anybody would disagree, was absolutely fantastic. How do we make sure, from a UK perspective now, probably in the short term, but certainly over the year of our presidency, how do we make sure on some of those financial commitments, which are so important to the developing world, that we actually hold fast to them and they actually get delivered? Because frankly, the track record in the past from past COPs is, you know, doesn't fill me, and I'm sure not others, with a, you know, huge amount of confidence that that cash is actually going to be delivered on time.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's pretty embarrassing, you know, and it's pretty embarrassing to walk into a room and suggest you're leading this and others should do more and disrupt their own economies in a way that's more significant than ours would be when we haven't stumped up with promises that have been made over the last few years. I wouldn't claim to be a finance person or anything like that, you know, but I think we do have to. So people talk about mobilizing this kind of stuff. I think we've got to stump up and give over and do what we've promised in the past. That's the very first step that we've got to do as the UK. I think I've just come off a call this afternoon talking about where we go in the future and more strategy documents to talk about international overseas development aid and all this kind of stuff and where we're going to go and whatever, you know. And there is this cloud, I guess, that hangs over that a little bit to some extent. You know, whereas we've been called out for being one of the ones that hasn't stumped up with the cash. I guess we've got to lead by example. I don't have the answer, but it doesn't help. You know, and
no,
you know, it doesn't make me feel good. I don't know the answer to the question, but yeah, I feel probably like you and everybody on this call. You know, we could and probably should be doing more in that. I think bringing in Mark Carney at the outset, you know, or not quite at the outset, kind of halfway through. I think that was really, really good, you know. Yeah. And I think we do well to look and use leading economists and financiers far better and get them on stage with politicians so that they can stand up to them.
Okay. I'm going to ask either Claire or Greg. I'm assuming, well, I know Claire's on the call, but I can't see Greg at the moment. But what's your take, without sort of giving us your spiel that you're going to give us in a few moments? What was your take on Bob's sort of perception of the role of, if you like, non-technology solutions? You know, cycling, walking, alternative public transport and so on, because there were lots of people who were quite critical about that in terms of its late appearance, although Bob made it clear that he didn't think that that was the case. Claire, have you got a thought on that?
Yes, and I'm sure that Greg will have a word to. I mean, obviously, I will talk about this a little bit when I have to say a few words. But first of all, I mean, look, I get what you were saying, Bob. That the framing of this around ZEVs, this was the big focus, and that was always going to be the case. And it was good to see the inclusion in the pact of, the reference to public shared active. I mean, obviously, people like me will say that's not enough, clearly. But look, I get completely where you're coming from. And I think I think in a way you sort of almost had to pick one thing and sort of really go for it. And it was you had the world stage, it was a platform, it was something that the UK could actually do in a very proactive way, was to set those world leading targets and really focus on that. So I understand that. And actually I felt good that the UK was doing that. And I'm someone who very much will be in the side of, looking at, we absolutely have to reduce the volume of traffic. So that's my just quick fire response. Yeah. I'm sure Greg will be able to add. Yeah,
Greg's on the call. He sent me a message. Greg, any initial thought?
Yeah, I'm not actually too enraged by a lack of consideration of walking, cycling and public transport. If you consider COP to be a really global bringing together of countries, then the range of contexts that we're talking about decarbonisation in is massive. I mean, I think if anything, the criticism would be that the balance of the debate about what we're decarbonising doesn't really take into account the mix of the type of vehicles that exist in lots of different countries, and could we be innovating in other ways. So I think it's a little bit of a kind of global north perspective on decarbonisation, but then that's where we are with the majority of the emissions from fleets at the moment. So I perfectly understand how it's come out. I think a bit like Bob, I think I would say, and I'll say a little bit more about this, it's not, what happened at COP is not really about what matters in terms of our balance of active travel and public transport here in the UK. I think COP did some other things.
Excellent. Okay, thanks very much. Tanya, just a quick word from you, if I may. Bob made reference there to some fairly significant commitments, if you like, beyond passenger cars, which for those people who know that there is a world beyond cars, it's actually quite gratifying that it got its space in the sun, as it were. What was your take on not so much the UK and others commitment, but the fact that lots of people were not as forthcoming in terms of heavy goods, in terms of emissions going forward? They seemed to be quite reluctant. Was my sort of take on it. What was your view?
Yeah, and I think Bobby mentioned it, the visibility of trucks was kind of there but not there, and I think that's the bit that I think was missing. Like we talked about the policy and the things that were happening, but actually were trucks actually visible? Did we have a presence? Were we being discussed in the right forums? And obviously you attended our event and you supported us, and we had a lot of momentum at that event. But to be honest, without that fringe event, I don't feel like we would have had any presence. I think the zero emission road freight trials and things that are happening, I think there could have been more on that. So I think I'd probably pose the question of what can we do after now? What can we do to encourage that visibility and get a bit more of a voice in a big space, really?
Yeah, okay, thanks for that. Bob, just a more general question. I'm thinking of three areas that were pretty major events at COP. The methane announcements, the deforestation announcements, and obviously the cars and trucks announcements. They were all really excellent because they were a real step forward in terms of where we've been in terms of previous COPs. I personally was just disappointed that we seem to have spent a lot of time talking about the people who haven't signed up, whether that's, car manufacturers like Volkswagen and so on, whether that's India on methane emissions or coal, whether it's Australia. Do you think we're we're being a bit sort of dog in the manger, as it were, in terms of not celebrating the things that were brought forward, or should we be properly spending, you know, a good deal of time, frankly, focusing our attention in our year of our presidency on those countries, those companies that didn't step up?
Yeah, I think it. I think it's difficult to know which side to come down on, and I've thought about this. I've had very little time to think about where we are right now, having come through COP and come through with the transport decomp plan, having announced the UK is going to put in place a ZEV mandate. You know, that we've got phase out dates for all road vehicles in the UK. It's incredible. For non-zero emission, not road vehicles. We're not phasing out road vehicles. Don't get too excited, Greg. I think it is important. I think it's important to name and shame, right? Okay, genuinely. And I think if we'd come away feeling that we'd done too good a job, when actually we'd done 30% and 70% was remaining, and been thoroughly celebratory, that's probably the wrong way around. So we've got 30% of global sales on board. We're lacking 70, so we need to push harder and make sure that we call out whilst we can, when we are confident that it's the right thing to do. Call them out for not being there. There was, it was close. You know, there's certain technicalities I can reveal. You know, but we wouldn't change the wording in order to get people on board. We wanted to maintain the strength of those dates and the commitments to zero emission. So I think it's right to name and shame rather than to just applaud the gunners. Okay,
thanks for that. Just going to move on now, Claire. I think you're next up to give us a few of your thoughts on good cop, bad cop.
Thank you. Yes, and thank you very much, Bob. That was really good to hear, and I really like the way you frame it as, you know, pick which side. You know, you decide, because I actually think that's a really important point. I mean, I choose to see this as a good cop. I've chosen to see this as, to coin a phrase, the end of the beginning. But it's the end of the beginning of the first year of our year, should I say, the UK's year of presidency. So there's a lot to do, and clearly, you know, on it will go. But there were some big wins, which I just think it's worth. I mean, the fact is that, you know, 1.5 degrees has become the new 2 degrees. Clearly, there's a massive gap, but the yearly ratchet means that, you know, there's pressure now for next year for countries to come back with stronger NDCs. I mean, brilliant that coal has been named and shamed for the first time. Even if some of the wording was watered down, we did see that share prices of some leading coal companies, there was a slide there, and that there's an impact on the carbon prices in the EU emissions trading scheme. So that, you know, to a record high price there. So there was an impact, even just from that signal. There is a big problem. I mean, a central problem I think we all grapple with is that carbon isn't priced properly. And, you know, we have been really calling for a strong, predictable, rising carbon price. Well, obviously that wasn't achieved, but nevertheless, good progress was made on Article 6, you know, the common rule book for carbon accounting. So it felt like a step again in the right direction. And from the perspective of Zemo, I mean, I think this really was the business and finance COP. You know, really great opportunities, I would say, arising from that. As we've already touched on, those sector deals really did help build momentum and, you know, really showed in a way that the extent to which businesses has very much come to the fore. There's definitely a role for, I would say, you know, greater partnership, greater collaborative working. It was notable, we've already touched on, there was some big emissions, but is there some, you know, in terms of signing up to the zero emissions pact? But, you know, plenty did sign. And what is the role for Zemo? I mean, does the partnership need a more international perspective, you know, perhaps linking with other equivalent organisations in other countries, a more global perspective? But it certainly raises lots of questions and opportunities, I think, for the partnership. And the role of government, of course, is as critical as ever. I mean, that's just because business stepped up. I mean, we absolutely have to have that framework. And as we've already touched on, it was great that the UK has set these leading targets for, you know, clean vehicles, for ending the sales of polluting road vehicles, which I feel really good about. It has been a spur to innovation. and as an example. But it's also important to consider the wider system of taxes and incentives. So, for example, as many will have heard me say on many occasions, if we electrify the car fleet without replacing fuel duty with some form of road pricing, not only is this going to leave a big hole in the public finances, but the traffic could rise by an additional 30% as the cost of running a car. So that's, I mean, that's just an example of this, of the wider areas in which government really needs to keep close to it. I mean, the right regulatory and fiscal environment and consistency of government policy is crucial for the private sector. And I think one of the things that we're really blessed with in the UK is the strong cross-party consensus. We know there's not going to be a major shift. I mean, we could worry perhaps in the US if the change of administration could potentially be perilous. But for the UK, we do have that consensus. Things don't always go in a straight line, but I think more importantly is the scrutiny that we're now going to be seeing going forward increasingly is going to just grow, with businesses is so engaged, consumers, concern from the public is at an all-time high. So we know that this issue has really come to the fore. But going forward, I would say that probably one of the most critical issues, and we've already just touched on it briefly, but I will now mention it properly. It is the issue of demand reduction, of behaviour change, and it was for all the reasons we've discussed. It didn't come to the prominence in this COP, but I would argue has to be a focus for this year, for this presidency year. And I think a big serious issue that we have, there's a disconnect, if you will, between public support for tackling climate change, which is very high, and an understanding of the changes that people actually need to make in their own lives, which is very low. So, a predominantly technology-led approach, to be honest, it has to be noted, has not delivered huge reductions since 1990. We haven't seen a huge amount of progress. And it was good to see the declaration, including the reference to, but we have to shared, active and public transport. But we do have to go much further on this agenda. I mean, the Scottish Government has pledged a 20% cut in car kilometres. The UK government has acknowledged the importance of modal shift, but it feels that it's been delegated very much more to local authorities to deliver this. The Committee on Climate Change has highlighted that there is a policy gap here. The policies to reduce or reverse traffic growth are undeveloped. So I think, to conclude from my perspective, I would propose that there is a crucially important piece of analysis needed, and that Zemo would be best placed to do this work. We know that we can't rely on clean technologies alone, and that some level of traffic reduction will be needed. Estimates have varied from anywhere by 20–60% by 2030. The point is, we don't know how much. It all depends on a whole range of factors. The rate of uptake of ULEVs, improvements in conventional car efficiency, the size of the fleet, how clean is the energy, etc., etc. But we need to know. So, as I regularly say, the government does need to begin an honest conversation with the public about some of the choices, the difficult choices ahead. But this conversation needs to be informed by the best evidence possible. And I do, to coin a phrase, we need to be guided by the science. So that's my proposal request for Zemo.
Okay, thanks very much, Claire.
I'm sure work that could be done there.
I'm sure we'll come back to that. I'll come to Bob in a minute, but just to remind people, if you want to ask a question, just wave your hand in the chat function. We want people to feel free to ask questions. But I was just, from Claire's response to Bob's short presentation, I was just going to put Andy on the spot as CEO of the partnership. We clearly have to see a change in terms of the collective nature of the partnership in response, and whether that's in terms of a more aggressive, a more appropriate response from car manufacturers to the ZEV mandate, whether that's, you know, a greater standing up of the freight sector. Do you think that Zemo needs to take, you know, a stronger stance, notwithstanding the fact that we work and still want to work extremely closely with government, a stronger stance in terms of pushing the private sector to really step up to the plate in some of the areas where we've already admitted collectively and individually that perhaps, you know, some people have been found a bit wanting?
Thanks for putting me on the spot, Phil, with that one. I think I've actually just come off a conversation with a member about making sure that the voice of the commercial sector, and you know, our membership is ostensibly a commercial sector and then government and public sector are sort of balanced, making sure those voices are balanced and the practicality. I think what we have got in COP, and I think Bob articulated really clearly, it was all about getting zero emissions writ large, getting those big headlines. But behind that, as Bob indicated, it's a negotiation, it's a collaboration, it's all these people around the table working the details. And I think that's the role of the partnership, is to try and work the details, if you like, below those headlines that have come out of COP and see how we actually deliver on them. And make sure that we've got the practical solutions, ambitious, yes, and we keep pushing that, but that they are practical to take us along that way. And that means taking industry with us. I think there's always differences across different industries, but I think we need to provide a platform where those angsts, if you like, can be played out, and we can bring everybody along to try and move the whole sector.
But do you think, as we're moving, I won't even say to the end game. I liked Claire's description. We're at the the end of the beginning, not the beginning of the end. But we will probably have to sharpen our pencil in terms of being quite critical of those who are seemingly, for reasons that aren't technically defensible, lagging behind some of the people who are really putting themselves out there in terms of delivering on the net zero agenda.
I think, yeah, perhaps we've got to be more, more, if you like, critical and but also supportive of those members that aren't stepping up to the plate and trying to challenge them. I think on both sides, and there's a chance that we may need to challenge any areas of government that aren't stepping up to the plate as well. So I think your point, Phil, is well made, that maybe we need to have a stronger voice, albeit based on really robust evidence, and making sure we dig behind the headline to understand what really is needed and what really is meant. Yeah,
and I think Claire's point about, you know, research and analysis is absolutely spot on. Bob, just picking up on one point that Claire made with regard to the role of demand reduction and so on. You know, there's not much point in sort of going over what did or what didn't happen in the sense at COP, because I think we're all aware that there needs to be greater emphasis placed on the behaviour change and demand reduction. My question was more whether we're missing a trick sort of collectively, because if we can actually emphasize in a much more robust way demand reduction, we've got a real opportunity of engaging, you know, literally tens of millions of people in the agenda who perhaps aren't currently involved. And, you know, everybody will take a view and perhaps say, well, you know, people don't really want to make those changes. But I think it does. We are foregoing an opportunity. It's a rhetorical question rather than, you know, we seem to be foregoing an opportunity to engage whole swathes of the public in this agenda by not really concentrating on the demand reduction agenda. It's a question. I just want to respond to it. No, he's not. Right. OK. We'll move on, if I may. I think next up is Tanya. Tanya, who is going to give us her perspective from Scania and the trucks sector. Tanya.
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, so firstly, good cop, bad cop. Love that phrase. I'm going to start with saying that I think it was a good cop. Personally, I was there. I got to kind of get the vibe of what was going on. Found that really great in terms of driving things forward. I think my thoughts is that there's still a long way to go. So I think like the year ahead for me, in 12 months' time, we're kind of going to look back and we're going to ask the question: was it a good cop? Was it a bad cop? And I think the answer will be yes. I think we should be optimistic and we should hold on to that thought. I'm really optimistic about the chances of 1.5. I think when we talk about what was happening just a few years ago, we were talking about 6 degrees, 4 degrees. We're now pushing forward towards 1.5. So I think that's a really important thought to hold on to. I think it was close at the end. I think we were on the seat of our pants watching the days as they were following through and thinking, are we going to meet Paris Agreement? Are we going to get there? So I think that was something that was quite close at the end. I think one of the things that I took away from it was that there definitely needs to be more engagement with government, especially from a commercial vehicle point of view. So obviously we were there, we were present, we were engaging, we were trying to bring the audience to us. But I think in order to impact the sector, the commercial vehicle sector, there needs to be more engagement. So that's a piece for me that I feel like we need to work on. I do really feel like we are entering a phase of transparency and accountability. So there's definitely no more space for kind of, not greenwashing because that's not the right term, but I would say, like Phil was saying, the laggers, the people that are lagging behind, actually now we've got this new kind of drive for accountability. So lots of things coming out, like the task force, and also with the science-based targets initiatives that we've signed up to and others have as well. I think frameworks like that are going to be really important going forward to make sure that we are being led by science and that we're being transparent and accountable. I think from a company perspective, we went to COP with some really key messages. Oh, some feedback there.
Okay.
Do you want to just mute you in there? Sorry. Yeah. I think from a company perspective, one of the things that I found quite interesting was that one of our key messages was that we are ready. So a global and a UK perspective, we feel like we are ready to start making a difference and to driving forward. And I think I would kind of caveat that with the fact that one of the big things that came out of our Fringe event was infrastructure. And I know that will come into some of the conversations later on and some of the questions, but I think the enablers, like Claire says, how we enable this now in terms of the price on carbon, infrastructure, and actually delivering on some of these things. I think that's the key now, is to lock all of those things together. And a big thing for me, and I know that I do talk about this a lot, I think it's the role of renewable fuels. I know we needed to pin down something, we need to talk about electrification and zero emission, but for us, we've got this issue with this rolling fleet, and actually how can we make an impact in the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years? And I think the role of renewable fuels was pretty invisible in this whole conversation. And for me, I feel like that's something that we need to focus on now, because actually the rolling fleet for Scania and for everybody else is the bit that we're going to need to focus on in the next 10 years, as well as electrification and as well as innovation. And I think we're really in a good place to do that in the UK. We've got some fantastic initiatives. We've got some great education that's happened. And I think we just need to move forward with the role of renewable fuels. So yeah, I think I'll end it there, Phil, and let you move on.
Okay. Yeah, Tanya, thanks very much. Very topically, just to give people credit, Bob wasn't blanking me. He actually froze, but he came back to answer my question. But I'll come back to that. The point that Tanya made has also been made, and forgive me because in the chat it doesn't actually give people's names other than their second name. So there's a question in the chat which really speaks exactly to what you were saying, Tanya, which is with regard to is the ZEV focus defensible when it doesn't include some key areas of vehicle production, disposal and infrastructure impacts? And I was just going to ask Bob if you perhaps just like to comment on if you like, what you might call secondary impacts, but now are becoming primary impacts in terms of how much we're now reliant on a forward-looking, sustainable net zero infrastructure network in order to pull off not just what we've been talking about in terms of passenger vehicles, but also in terms of heavy goods, freight and bus. So the question is really what price that we need to deliver in terms of the infrastructure support for the net zero agenda. Bob?
Yeah, thanks. I look forward to the demand, whatever it was. I lost it at that word last time. I can guess, but I won't. Yeah, look, I think genuinely to be a bit more pithy on this, we're at a point where I don't meet many people who don't think this is not going to happen now in terms of a transition to the entire way that we power our transport in the future. And that does require, we've always said it would, significant changes in infrastructure and new infrastructure in places. And that's got to be done the right way. There are all sorts of new opportunities that we can now start to talk about seriously in terms of the circular economy and how we use energy storage, whether hydrogen or batteries, in a way that goes beyond transport and is part of our energy system. And we can only do that and engage with the right people and do it in the right kind of way now that we know that we have taken this step and that we are going to regulate to deliver this change. And we're not going to wait for others, and we're not going to necessarily do it in the way that they would like it to be done to preserve their business. We are going to do it in a certain way. We're setting that out very clearly, and we can now take the next step, I guess, and engage with everybody else to work out how we make sure that whatever comes around it and is needed to support it, its foundations, is done in the right way.
Okay, very, very candid, very clear. I guess probably one of the very clear statements that at least the Prime Minister was making this week was around this exact topic of, infrastructure, not just electric vehicle charging points, but a much broader canvas. I don't know if Roger Hunter's on the call because I can't see him at the moment, but if he is, I just wanted Roger to ask you to perhaps just give us a bit of a comment on the point that Bob was then making, which is it's not just about physical infrastructure for transport, but it's actually now right across sectors in terms of energy storage. And I just wanted to get your take from an actual practitioner in the field as to how challenging that looks like post COP.
Well, it's a great question. I mean, it is about taking a systems approach, as you know, and I think the more we have got into this space and start to deliver more high-powered fast chargers and also more charging infrastructure in people's homes and businesses, we realise that it's a big conversation about electricity. It's about kind of how does it fit in with the grid connection? How does it fit in with the distribution network, that whole chain. And also, actually, I'd say quite enlightening, really, that we know that it's a force for good for the network if the digital solutions are handled in the right way. So you can really, put behind the meter storage, you can put solar panels in with a charge post, you can really think through how stationary batteries work with high-powered charging. I mean, these are all things that are being worked out by the industry. But yeah, it is a big systems approach. But I'm perhaps an optimist on this. But I think there's actually a lot of good innovation and solutions that will come from it, rather than worrying too much about any major blockages. I think government just needs to sort of help keep incentivizing that innovation agenda. And giving companies like mine, sort of the encouragement and freedom to keep going. And we obviously love the sort of stuff we've been doing with Bob and others in terms of putting some of these big pledges out there. 50,000 public chargers on the streets, by the middle of the decade. All these things really help raise the bar that then you kind of move towards, and we can only do that, of course, with the partnerships with with government and the regulators and others, you know, to bring it all together to make it happen.
Just a small supplementary to use one of Bob's favourite words, pithy. One of the things that we also need to do is not only to get the infrastructure in the ground, whether that be EVs or whether that be charging stations. We also need to educate, 30 million motorists how this transition is going to take place. And at the moment, my concern is that we're racing ahead with the technology, which is fantastic because, we've been sitting on our hands for quite a long time. But my worry is that we're going to leave whole tranches of the population behind unless we seriously get engaged with the demand reduction agenda. I don't know if you want to comment on that, Bob, Roger?
You said it well about education and how we, our role here, I think, in terms of education, Zemo's role, incredibly important. It's got to be one of the big levers, education of businesses, of users, motorists, etc.
Coming back to you, Andy, it's that whole area of education, behaviour change, demand reduction. We've, as a partnership, we've sort of historically been very sort of wedded to the technology solutions and not so much on the other side of the house, if I can call it that. Do you think that, to Roger's point and also to Bob's point, to be fair, that we need to up our game in this area, or do you think this is areas that other people should be spending attention on?
I think from my side, Phil, and Roger touched on it, it's a systems approach we've got to take. The problem we have is that we traditionally, and I think people in general, think about technology as being the system, and the soft squishy bit that it needs to be moved around or has to press the pedal. The people are actually part of that system. So whether it's their behaviour, whether it's their engagement in the purchasing, the education. So I think we need to incorporate people within this systematic approach. So there's a role for communication, for good evidence. I think one of the areas where we can hopefully help, and I think Tanya touched on it, was around this transparency. It's complex. It's a really, really complex space. And the question from Dave Spivey around life cycle is absolutely right. And we know to our cost that this sort of principle of the life cycle benefits of electric vehicles versus combustion with low carbon fuels, it becomes a really, really toxic environment to debate. So I think transparency of information, engaging the people as part of our systemic approach to this, combined with the technology, and I think we have a role to play in that. Okay,
we've got another couple of questions on infrastructure, which I'll come back to if I may. I just wanted to move on to give Greg Marsden a chance to give us a few thoughts from his perspective. Just to remind you, Greg is Professor of Institute Transport Studies at Leeds.
Yeah, thanks, Philip. So I went to COP for 4 days, came back with COVID. So if the answer was a personal good cop, bad cop, I'd probably go for the latter, but I'm pretty sure that's not what you invited me to share. So I think my initial reflections are the UK government's done a really good job here in taking forward a technology forcing position. And I think the development of the coalition of countries around phasing out ICE technologies is going to help accelerate the development of vehicle technologies of all different sorts we need for this, which will drive down unit costs. I think it makes the UK a better place to invest in demonstrating these developments, and as such I think it's a more vibrant place for Zemo and its partner members to be operating in. So that is definitely a bit of good cop from my point of view. I think, as Bob said, that it doesn't resolve the challenges of the decarbonisation plan. If anything, it intensifies some of the pinch points and the urgency which are there. It's certainly raised the political profile of tackling transport decarbonisation. I think the three things I'd pick out. The resolutions are all about zero emission and phase out dates for the end of selling of ICEs. critically important, but what matters to the budget is the average emissions of the fleet each year. There are no zero emission vehicles right now, nor for several years. As Tanya pointed to, things like sustainable fuels. I think the partnership has got an important role in accelerating the transition with the lowest emissions that we can deliver year on year, and that's not always been a popular message necessarily. The Secretary of State has wanted the partnership to focus on, even though we've done some great work in that area. I think there is a wider question. Somebody raised the issue about whole life emissions. I think the social responsibility of all of this. What does it actually look like globally to scrape this much metal out of the ground in different communities? How are those communities being protected? I think I would like to have seen a bit more about how this is going to be managed in terms of its social justice. I think the challenge on EV acceleration, particularly is where there's whether it's EV or hydrogen, even with the goods vehicles, I think it puts a lot more pressure on getting our grid infrastructure right in supporting companies in depot investment decisions. And I think the energy market's in a difficult period at the moment, and we haven't really got clarity on how we're going to pay for the system transition at the moment. Who's going to pay for it at what point? So I think we've got a really important role in the short run in trying to accelerate that discussion, but it is a difficult one. And then finally, the question of the final paragraph on, as well as a vehicle transition, we need a wider societal transformation. And as Claire said, that's absolutely the case. There are no Paris compliant pathways that don't involve some form of demand reduction and major mode shift in tandem. So I think that's where the partnership does have to engage with that agenda, because it has to happen in tandem. We can't just be on one side of the fence. We have to know how it all relates to each other. But for me, the big thing that maybe COP wasn't the right place to talk about it, but it's a big global issue. Post-pandemic, come spring, we know that public transport use is going to be down on where it was before, and the level of funding support to continue delivering the services we have at the moment isn't going to be as available. So I think we're going to be starting 2022 further backwards in terms of sustainable transportation than we were in September 2019, and we just don't have many spare years to cope with that. So I would like to have seen a bit more driven forward on that side of things, because otherwise we can't go any faster on the technology, and we can't fill the gap.
Okay, I'm going to come back to that if I might, Greg, that whole point about public transport, but I just wanted to pick up a couple of questions in the chat, and also something you just raised there about one is an input and one is an output in terms of sustainability. The question that's in the chat room is whether or not, as part of this whole transition, we're really giving enough thought to sustainable decommissioning, and is it really being considered? And to Greg's point, at the front end of the agenda, are we really clear about the amount of rare earths that we're going to have to be digging up in some fairly interesting parts of the world going forward? How sustainable is that, particularly when you have this fairly intense debate going on at the moment in terms of battery technology, electric vehicle charging technology? I don't know if Bob's still with us, but I just wanted to just give him the opportunity to respond. Is it the role of government to be intervening in that, or is it more that government should be setting the framework and insisting and encouraging and perhaps forcing the private sector to ensure that, whether it's use of renewable resources or whether it's sustainable decommissioning, that on the transition to net zero, we do actually make sure that it's one that is truly sustainable?
Yeah, I think it's for us to certainly be involved in that. Probably I'd describe it as encourage, support before we force, but we will force, and we're very well aware of the issues. And at the moment, we are, broadly speaking, in the UK, assured of the work that's going on in supply chains and the commitments that we have seen and know about from the transport industry. It's not just road vehicle manufacturers, but that's a reasonable place to start. You know, we're assured that that work is going on, and not just in terms of cleaning up what's going on now, but looking at different alternatives. So, you know, work with the Faraday Institute and all of that kind of stuff here as well, which we're particularly good at, as we all know. You know, kind of the chemistry around removing the need for all of this this mining and these rare earths and all of that kind of stuff. So at the moment, we're happy that it's going on at both ends, if you like. Obviously, it's not ideal. We can't shy away from it. We can't ignore it. And I don't think we do. And I think we'll be ready to take action, stronger action, if we think it's needed. Okay,
thanks for that, Bob. One other question on the infrastructure piece, which probably Tanya wondered whether you could just ask. The question is, how many logistics, construction companies and so on are engaged with Zemo and the commercial users of the vehicles? Or are we just operating a bit adjacent from the actual users of the commercial vehicles? And if so, what do we do about it?
You know, I think it's a really good point, and I think coming from the bus working group and seeing the audience that I've engaged with in that forum and coming into the commercial vehicle side of things, I think it's a completely different audience, and I think there are two differences as well. So working on the electric roads project has also taught me that there's different transport and logistics audiences as well. So I think we do need to do a bit more work on who the audience is in the commercial vehicle sector and get more members in. So I'd say that we are missing that, definitely.
Right. So Andy, any thought on that? I mean, it's, you know, it's a big commercial opportunity for UK PLC if we get hold of it.
Yeah, I think Tanya's right to reflect on the success that we had in buses, which was by having everybody around the same table. It's a small sector, I understood, and UK has a really strong supply side and a really strong demand side. And it's fair to say that we're not as representative of you know, all embracing within the truck side. We've got a number of significant companies. Obviously, John Lewis Partnership, UPS are there on the board, and we have a number of other members around the table. But there's no doubt we can increase that. It's a hugely diverse sector. And it's fair to say that getting all of those voices is a real challenge for us. So that is certainly a task that we will take back.
OK, we've got quite a lot of questions coming through, but I wanted to give our last panelist, Roger, an opportunity just to give us some thoughts that aren't around my questions, but are around what he wanted to say originally. So, Roger, over to you.
Yeah, super. No, thanks, Philip. For those of you that don't know me, I run Shell's EV charging solutions business globally. So we're across about 20 countries, and we basically sell EV charging solutions, so charge posts and software and things like that. I also sit on the board with Philip and some of the others. So it's just good to be here and say a few words. I think for me, from the energy perspective and looking at COP, it was a good COP. I think there were three things that really stood out. First one being the fact that we're shifting from a kind of 2-degree narrative to 1.5 degrees C as the sole target. I think just being sharper on that, clearer on that from COP26 was really good. The other thing that stuck out was the fact that you can't have it all. So it's this, this thing about compromise. And also a piece around collaboration between nations and states, etc. And then I think the third thing was that, how do we finance the transition? And not just in the UK, but, more broadly, how do we finance the transition to net zero energy as a system, as we talked about earlier? And how do we ensure that it's fair, that it's I think they used the words, a just transition? Yeah. So I think those three themes really came out. And I think, some of if I sort of unpack the first one a little bit, I mean, the fact that the Glasgow Pact really identified the need for a 45% reduction in global emissions by 2030 was very clear. I think the fact that you had 90% of the world now covered by some kind of net zero emission commitment, that's got to be good, right? And then I think, you know, we're in a position where we're recognizing that emerging economies are going to struggle because it's a more complex challenge. So having India stand up and give an announcement around net zero emissions by 2070 is actually pretty significant. It's kind of a big deal. But good to hear that the, you know, more developing emerging nations coming out like that. I think transport wise, we've got to, I mean, there's a lot being said about transport in terms of we should do this, we should do that, but I think we've got to get more granular in terms of what are we going to do by 2025. Yeah, bring it forward a bit. But it was really good to see, of course, I think in Glasgow there's maybe like 30 countries and a whole bunch of car manufacturers that pledged to 100% zero emission vehicle sales. Yeah, 100% zero emission vehicle sales by 2040, and of course in leading markets like in the UK and the progressive nature of the UK, we say we do it earlier. But look, the devil's in the detail really on that first point. I think the second point about compromise and collaboration, it's really interesting because the parallel here is, you know, there's a debate about phasing out coal that came up. Yeah, and I think that debate about phasing out coal in many ways has parallels with the debate about phasing out the internal combustion engine, because that, you know, demonstrates the requirement for collaboration between industry and government. You can't just switch these things off. So there's always going to be a bit of a compromise, and also certain countries have to go first, right? So the Glasgow Pact again called very clearly for a phase down, not a phase out of coal, whilst you've got this kind of quick group of countries that are committed to totally ending coal use in the 2030s. It's very, you know, similar to what we see with the internal combustion engine. And actually, you know, it showed in COP26 that when you do call for a whole bunch of bans and mandates, you're going to meet resistance. Yes, so you do need to build local and regional solutions. You know, and it's good to be in the UK because we're a bit sort of on the vanguard here, ahead of things there. So then I think the third piece, which was all about the financing side, a lot of discussion I saw about that. I think again on the financing side, it really applies to the future of mobility as well, right? All to do with transportation. So it was great to see that the Glasgow Financial Alliance, I think they call themselves, committed to, was it 130 trillion to align to net zero. So again, you know, good to hear that kind of stuff. Lots of I think the doubling finance for adaptation and many efforts were being made, I guess, for more vulnerable countries, reparations and repairs, climate related damage, you know, so putting, again, thinking of others, thinking of the broader context. You know, we all face the same global challenge, but we don't all have the same means to tackle the challenge. And I think that came out very strongly. And again, the parallel with transport, right? I mean, we talk about shifting to a zero emissions transport system, but not everyone can pay for a Tesla or install a home charger, right? So that kind of reality, you know, we've got to think of a just transition. So I guess in conclusion, where does it leave us? Well, I mean, it really shows us, the COP26 really showed us that it's the combination of business and finance and government, you know, really coming, and society coming to the table that's going to enable the change. I'm sure that this resonates with a lot of you on the call, as we're part of that change from the business side, and as well as the you know, as well as educating folks as well. For me, I felt that the Glasgow COP26 really kind of reflected or Shell's powering progress strategy, this kind of work I'm doing, the kind of investment we're putting into EV charging. It kind of really, you know, we really recognise as an energy company, I know others do as well, BP, others, we're really recognising the importance of our role as business to really make this work. So look, Philip, I'm optimistic as usual. We can still meet the Paris Agreement. We have to do that. And I'm convinced that if we have the right leadership, then we'll get there.
Okay. Roger, as always, very, very comprehensive. One specific question for you, if I may. You talked about the role of corporates. You talked about the importance of sound financing, and I think two people on the call have already talked about the requirement for transparency. What's your take in terms of from a, and obviously not necessarily specifically from a Shell perspective, but from a corporate sector perspective, what do you think we need to do to put that level of transparency in place such that we don't just go away from Glasgow and COP26 with lots of fine aspirations that don't actually translate into granular plans that we can all measure the metrics and say in a year and in 5 years' time, that's what we said we were going to do. This is what we've done as a result of it.
That's the big change of gear that's needed. It's the shorter term plans, the 2025, what are we going to achieve by then? And I just think that what happens is, the more government comes together with business in order to, and with the finance, etc., in order to actually galvanise some of those plans and be a bit clearer, make them tangible, the better. And as I say, I'm quite chuffed about being able to put that big number out there for public charging in the UK. But what it's done is we'll either make that number or we won't, Phil. So at least there's a number there. And I think if others do the similar, you get an aggregated effect across those pledges, those ambitions, and then you get more change as a result. It galvanizes an organization, but you can only put those things out there because they're so radical and they need investment and they need incentives and various other kind of help. You can only do them when you bring others along.
Yeah, well, talking about that, I was going to ask Tanya. We've got a number of questions in the chat, but there's one which sort of goes to the heart of that, which is about the workforce of the future, and it's probably not just for Tanya. It's probably for anybody who wants to pitch in, but it's really about how do we bring people in industry, not necessarily the technology, the people in industry. And I guess probably from what Tanya is saying, also about the skills. We all know that there's a skills gap that we have, and that needs to be filled if we're going to really make the sort of transition that we need to make. And also, I think Greg touched on it specifically. If we don't have a workforce that has the skills to make that transition, we're going to have whole swathes of our employed workforce that actually suddenly find that they're left behind. They're operating in a digital world with analog skills. So I just wanted to get Tanya your specific thought on the workforce of the future.
Yeah, no, and thanks for that, Phil. And I think that for me, it's a bit of the puzzle that we've kind of not ignored, but probably just taken for granted that everyone will just jump on the bus and be happy to move forward with this new shift. And I really feel like internally we've done a big piece. I'm sure this is every company, a big piece on the technology, what's coming, the changes that are afoot. But actually the people that we need to engage with more are the people that will use the technology, sell the technology, work on the technology, and actually they're not part of the journey at the moment. They're just listening to it from the outside, looking in. And I feel like to engage with people and to bring them on the journey, we need to get everybody involved. And that's a big focus for us at Scania at the moment, is that actually we've brought the technology to the party, but actually we now need to bring the people with us as well, because otherwise we won't get the result that we need. And I think as well, there's a lot of work going on in the background. A lot of us are all working away in the background to create training, to bring people on this culture change. There's a lot of work happening, some really great stuff happening. We just need to collaborate as well, I think, in that space as well to harness the opportunity that's taken place.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much for that. Gaynor makes a great point in the chat, and I'll do no better than really to repeat what she said, which is that given the embodied energy is higher in BEVs, very crudely emissions will go up before they come down. That means it's much more important to address things that can be done now, i.e. decarbonising fuels and addressing demand reduction. I think that's probably a point that's been made a couple of times already, certainly by Tanya and others. But many people liking that point, which really I think just gives it the power that she's made it with. Just dancing around slightly, Claire, I just wanted to not lose the public transport comments that have been made, both in the chat and also in the conversation. We are in a really tough spot in the sense that we couldn't have asked for a worse situation in terms of public transport than the onset of the pandemic. And despite some newfound optimism, we're still seeing that whilst I think 70% of people may have returned to office work of some sort, still less than 50% of people are actually using public transport, unless you're talking about trains into the capital. And I just wonder, Claire, what you think we need to do collectively in order to, if you like, get people back on the bus, literally and metaphorically.
Gosh, I mean, where to begin? And I mean, I'm really glad you've put the spotlight on it, because it's a tragedy, really, that one of the outcomes is that we've gone backwards. You know, the social distancing has that sort of stigma has remained, and we do need a big concerted campaign to really reassure people that around public transport. So that's, and because I think the stigma is going to be around for some time. But I mean, I think the problem is that what really COVID has done is accelerated some structural changes, and it's too early to say, but how are people, to what extent are people going back to work, going back to the cities? You know, how there is, I mean, I think there's a certain amount of just change in work and travel patterns that is now we're going to have to live with. So part of it is the stigma, which we can do comms around that, but I do think that there's a shift, and I think we need to, in a way, we have to lean into that. You know, if we can, you know, to improve digital connectivity, that those sorts of things as well, walking and cycling. Building, I mean, I think we should see much more and talk much more about the 15-minute neighbourhoods. You know, the Mayor of Paris has been really doing a lot of work on, and that's something that's discussed more and more, because I think planning and building in that structure from the start is absolutely crucial. But look, the answer to the question, Philip, is there's no quick silver bullet, but it's all of those things. Getting rid of the stigma, recognising though that the economy has changed to some extent. We weren't really, public transport wasn't in a great place before, so we were already seeing. But what we do have a government that is actually very pro public transport, and despite the debacle of the announcement last week on the integrated rail plan that seemed to kind of annoy everybody, actually that is a massive investment in rail, for example. So we have a pro public transport government, best that I've seen since I've been working in this field. So that's a positive. Yeah, have I answered? There's so much to say.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Bob, I didn't know whether or not you had anything you might want to add to that. I mean, there are sort of more radical solutions being posed out there, which is, you know, why don't we just give everybody a free bus pass? You know, it's cheaper than some of the alternatives. But you know, there are some more radical solutions out there to encourage people. But Claire may be right. It may be structurally that we made a shift that we're not going to come back from.
I agree, and I don't think that shift is finished yet. I mean, it's easy to say transport's always changing and people are always changing, and lifestyles are always changing, but I don't think we've finished this shift, because I think we're part way through it, and as people haven't rushed back to offices necessarily, people haven't finished relocating, people haven't finished moving to a different job. People haven't finished all of that. They haven't quite. They've seen new opportunities, and they're still thinking it through. I genuinely think that. So it's not a holding line for us to say we still don't know the impacts on travel demand in the future from COVID. And I think it will be. I don't know. Yeah, I think it will still be some time from that. We've got a transport system, public transport system. We've got the one that we've got from before COVID, and Claire's absolutely right. We are passionate about getting more people, more patronage onto it now. But we've got one, particularly on our railways, that's geared to delivering a service that now, at the moment, people don't want. You know, trains are busier at the weekends, than they are in certainly on Mondays and Fridays, but during the week, you know. So we've got to bottom that out, and I think just giving everybody free access isn't. We've looked at that. We don't think it works. Okay,
well, I'm sure that will come back round. A couple of comments in the chat about we should have highlighted coaches earlier. I think that's a sector that's not seen as very visible. Lots of buses at COP, which was good. And then, interestingly, observation, which Claire might like to comment on, a good start might be to understand at a much more granular detail the carbon footprint of individuals and the way we all move around, so that we can actually make more informed decisions about what sort of transport solution that we individually take up. What do you think about that, Claire?
I couldn't agree more. I mean, we just need so much more information. People need to be much better informed, and I do believe, I mean, if I may come back to the challenge that I've set, we also need to understand just how much shift do we need to make. If I may just repeat that that I mentioned at the start, I do hope that is taken forward, because if we don't answer that question, we're flying blind. You know, so yes, we need to understand much more the carbon content of every journey that we do. We also need to understand, therefore, how much bluntly demand reduction do we need. We need to know that, depending on how quickly we roll out, electrify, etc., etc. So this is the piece of information, that big piece. It's a big piece of work that I think would really galvanise, and it could be very helpful to government, because in a way, you know, it's the evidence. We can't argue with the evidence. We've got to be guided by the science. I think this would only help government in beginning to have that honest conversation about behaviour, about the choices that we make.
Fine. Okay, Greg, I just wanted to bring you back in, if I may. You made the point about this needs to be a social, it needs to be a just transition. It's just not a transition for the affluent. How worried should we be that if we, as Bob says, this transition, this change structurally in terms of the way we move about is not yet complete? How worried should we be that actually, you know, significant proportion of the population who actually don't own a vehicle, let alone have the ability to use it, how concerned should we be that that section of the population is going to get left further behind in this transition?
Well, I think it should be kind of up front in our analysis. Clearly, the people who are reliant on public transport, we've put an awful lot of money into preserving the system for them through the pandemic. My concern is we turn the tap off too quickly, we'll lose the benefits of the billions of pounds that we've put in as commercial service providers make realistic decisions about what they can afford to provide. So I think it'll be bad value for money if we turn it off really quickly. But then at the other end of the equation, people are moving electric. It's cheaper to move around, as Claire said. You've still got the purchase premium. But you know, Roger was talking about you know, solar panels. I've got solar panels connected to my charge point. You know, for 6 months of the year, I'll probably hardly be paying anything for my mobility, and yet pump prices are what, £100.50 for a litre now. This is going to become one of the least fair bits of taxation in the UK in the next decade. I mean, I'm not so worried about the taxation hole for the Treasury, because I think there are always other ways you can fill that, but I think the way this is going to play out across the population is going to be quite unfair, and it's happening in parallel with what's going on with the post-COVID recovery. So I think it's a really, really serious issue.
Okay, I don't think there's probably too many people who will be rushing to defend the Treasury on that basis, but I take your point entirely. Interesting couple of points in the chat, just as not so much questions, but Grant Pearson says, interestingly, we had an electric bus yesterday to get from the car park to the marquee at the CBI conference, but getting to the port in South Shields by public transport was much more challenging. I think that probably just sort of illustrates the scale of the challenge, actually. Just looking at my watch, we've got about 10 minutes. I've asked Andy if he would, as CEO of the partnership, just give us a few thoughts on what he's heard in terms of this conversation, the stuff that's come through the chat room and also his own personal reflections. And then if we get time, I'll just give everybody a chance on the panel just to give us literally a 30-second sum up of how they're feeling about COP26. So Andy, over to you.
Thanks, Phil, and thank you to all of my my board members, all my bosses, for their thoughts. I mean, I think it's a really interesting area. So key takeaway is I think it was a good COP, and there are a lot of good things coming out of it, a lot of good headlines, objectives. What struck me was one of Bob's comments about the TDP, which is the backdrop for what we need to deliver, is there to deliver a 50% reduction over the next 10 years and a 50% reduction over the decade after that. And I think I reflect back on when we started as the low CVP 20 years ago. We had targets for the numbers of vehicles we wanted to sell in particular sector, ULEVs or low emission buses. We didn't have a greenhouse gas target, and 20 years on, greenhouse gas emissions from transport hadn't reduced. We delivered on those targets, 10% of the new car fleet in 2012 being lower than 100 grams, 600 low carbon emission buses. We had ULEVs, over 10% ULEVs in 2020. So I think one of the key things is to have a greenhouse gas target that we kind of look at the actual, what we're actually delivering, as well as those bold headlines about numbers of vehicles, numbers of this, and I think that's what we're here to do, is actually deliver reduction in greenhouse gases, and all of the other pieces of the jigsaw are focused to do that. Now that brings us back to the sort of point that has been raised very widely about how complex this is, and from where we were in a decade ago, this is now a full system of complexity that requires a much more collaborative approach, and I think that's where the partnership really comes to the fore. We need all of the different voices around the table in order to create the environment for success, for the technologies and the changes that need to happen, and the appetite for the people in terms of behaviour and shared mobility as well. So I think it's that if you like, an extra call to engage more widely and to bring those voices around the table is one of the things that I think really struck me. We've traditionally been focused on the technology, and I think there's still a very heavy technology lead throughout this. But more and more, I think the evidence, information and communications as an enabler in the change needs to be played out. It's becoming a very complex space for people to understand what they should be doing, and we hopefully can cut through that and really help. And I think there's also a role in terms of intermediate perspectives, trying to not just focus on the 10 years or the 20 years or 2050. We've got to think carefully about what's actually being delivered in a 2-year time frame and a 3-year time frame. So those messages about rigour and evidence, I think, are great. I think we need to grapple with some of the elephants in the room. So things like the life cycle impact, continuing our role in looking beyond just the tailpipe. And we're already doing work on the wider sustainability beyond just greenhouse gas, embedded greenhouse gas in vehicles, and looking at overall energy consumption and indeed wider aspects of sustainability. And I think that's an area where we want to play more widely. I guess the concluding takeout is, I think probably with me at the helm, as well as the way that we've approached things as a technology-led, sort of engineering-led environment, it feels to me like what we need to do, and John and Jason and the rest of the team, we've actually got to bring the economists, the communications, the behavioural scientists to the same fore as the engineering to approach this system in a more comprehensive way. And that actually is probably one of my takeouts from setting we've fired the starting gun, I think, with COP and what's come out of it and the big, bold ambitions that are no doubt there. We now have a real year of opportunity to work out how to deliver on that. And I hope that we, in a far more comprehensive way, can be a key part of that year of opportunity.
Okay, thanks very much, Andy. Just one specific question to you, because it was sort of touched on by a couple of folk in the conversation, not so much in the chat. Finance has been a big aspect of COP, some very big numbers bandied around. the requirement for the finance sector in the UK to get much more actively involved. Should we as a partnership be seeking much closer relationships with the big beasts in the finance world to be, members of the partnership, more active in the partnership? How should we engage? Because without the cash, some of this is not going to happen.
I think absolutely is the answer, that we need to use the members we've got more actively, and we've got a number of good members. And again, we come back to where the bus sector has led, because it's been contained, because it's been the focal point. Can we replicate that success? And there have been significant successes there, both with the financial structures. Can we replicate that? But I think you're right. We've got to use our members, and this is where, as I say, the economist's voice needs to be up there, writ as large as the engineer's voice in how we take things forward and how we approach our work programme and activity.
Fine. Okay, thanks very much. I'm just now going to ask our 4 panelists to just give us a minute, if they may, just in any concluding thoughts. So perhaps we'll just kick off with Tanya. Sorry to drop you straight into it.
That's fine. Yeah, just to echo what Andy's saying, I think the kind of angle that we need to take needs to shift slightly, so it's less of an engineering. Oh God, sorry.
It's all right.
Less of an engineering conversation and more of a systems conversation. So bring everyone in the room, and I think bus have definitely done that, and I think that's the blueprint that we need to follow. That's probably not a minute, 30 seconds, but I'll hand over to Claire.
No, that's good. Claire?
No, thank you. And that's brilliant, actually. It feels like there's a real emerging consensus around this whole system, just bringing everyone into the room. I mean, I've said really everything that I want to say about my key message is that we've just got to look at the demand reduction, where that fits in. I really like the way Andy frames it. I think the way he put it, we need to look at total CO2, and that's what we've got to keep focused on. And you start from that point, and everything flows from that. So I feel, and I think finally, I just wanted to reiterate that I really do see this as a step forward. This is beginning. It was a great COP. Just want to say that again, because I think it's important really to pat ourselves on the back when something goes right. So let's feel positive.
Thanks. Roger?
Well, you've probably heard me say this many times before, but for me, it's definitely not just about focusing on the clean energy side, but it's about really focusing on doing things in a smarter way. Really adopting digital technology, looking at the new business models that allows for. It's been referenced, in the debate we just had about public transport. So this combination of smarter and cleaner transportation solutions with more credible near-term goals will put us much more in an assured position, I feel, over the next few years.
Okay, thanks, Roger. Greg?
Yeah, thanks. And I think what the discussion's shown is that COP's given even more momentum to what we had there. I think the debates to get there as fast as we need to, it's become more complex, and I think there's a role for us as the board, but also the partnership in discussion with Bob. What are we going to do to help resolve some of those key complexities, and which ones do we best steering out of? We can't do everything, and the agenda just keeps growing, if you like. So I think that's a takeaway for me. Okay,
Bob, last word to you, I think.
Gosh, thanks, and thanks, Zemo, CBE members, board, everybody. I think this has been a 2-year marathon, followed by a bit of a sprint the last couple of weeks. But I think actually we will hopefully soonish, maybe over a Christmas break or something like that, but certainly in the years to come, look back at what we've all achieved together in the last couple of years and think that, yeah, actually we did start to make some real progress and start to get a grip on what needed to be done. To reassure everybody, nobody said anything that hasn't either been considered or isn't underway. Some things get into the spotlight, some things appear in the media, some things work particularly well in certain politicians' speeches and play to their strengths, as we saw on Monday, and some don't. Okay, so talking about demand reduction is pretty difficult in certain environments, you know, but don't underestimate the fact that work on that is underway, and particularly around public transport and options for people so that they don't have to use their private cars. You know, providing the options. We're not being complacent at the moment and waiting to see what happens with the other side of COVID and travel demand. You know, we're putting all of the options in place now, so everything is happening in parallel. But yeah, we can do it even faster.
Excellent. Bob, thanks very much for your time. I know how busy you still are, even though COP has concluded. And also thanks to Claire, Tanya, Roger and Greg for taking part in the panel and responding to my somewhat elliptic questions, no doubt. Thanks to everybody on the call. We've had a good 70 odd people on the call. We've had some good stuff in the chat room. This is going to be recorded, or has been recorded, and will be available for membership to look at, and for anybody who's been on the call who wants to revisit anything. But thanks very much for your time. I think we've just about dispatched the chair's duty by finishing on time, and we look forward to a Zemo partnership, and certainly as the chair, and I'm sure Andy as the CEO and board, look forward to working with Bob and his team to implement what I would call, and I think everybody agrees, is a goodish COP26. So thanks very much for your time, and speak to you soon.